All right, well, thanks for being here today. This is our webinar on how to connect with the Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center. We had an open house several months ago in December to welcome new folks to our community. And one of the messages we heard loud and clear was that we needed to be more clear about how to work with us and how to partner with us in the future. So we put together this short webinar to give you some background on how the center works and how you might connect with us in the future. So today you'll hear from me, Will Farmer, the Acting Federal Director of the Northeast CASC, and Addie Rose Hollland, the Deputy University Director of the CASC. I'll let Addie Rose introduce herself here.
Hello, Addie Rose Hollland here at UMass Amherst, Deputy University Director for NE CASC.
All right, and with that, we'll jump right in and I will save questions for the end. So first I want to talk about the network writ large. So the Northeast CASC is a Climate Adaptation Science Center is one of 9 centers situated across the US, including Alaska and the Pacific Islands. It's been around for about a decade, and overall the mission of the network is to deliver this science to help fish, wildlife, plants, water, land, and people adapt to climate change. The important elements of that are consistent throughout our network are finding ways to help managers address the needs of public lands and natural resources. So thinking about how do we work closely with managers for actionable science, which I'll talk about in a moment. Another strength of ours or intent of ours is to collaborate closely with tribal nations and indigenous communities to prepare for climate risks. We do this through a tribal liaison program that we partner with the BIA through. In addition, a third sort of mission orientation of our network is to build the next generation of scientists. The network, each center in the network is a partnership between university and federal employees and are situated at a university. What that allows us to do is connect with students and other postdocs for the next generation of scientists. Again, we're 9 centers. This is just a quick map to show you, roughly speaking, the geographic coverage of each of the 9 centers. We're the purple center up in the upper right there. And this is a little bit of a zoom in on our footprint. Prior to a number of years ago, we covered all of the states you see here, the purple and the gray, and just recently have been able to launch the gray region into its own CASC, the Midwest CASC. And that has allowed the Northeast region to focus very closely on the challenges that we think of as the typical Northeast, addressing those challenges directly. We're going to talk more about the partners that you see listed on that site presently. So for here, I'll pass it over to Addie Rose to tell you a little bit about the partnership.
Great, thank you, Will. So the Northeast CASC represents a partnership of federal agencies, academic institutions, and, as Will said, an intertribal organization. Each of these partners brings a different set of expertise to the CASC and deepens our network of connections to other partners. And each partner within this network brings at least one lead PI who participates on the NE CASC leadership team to inform strategic directions and emerging questions. The funding comes through the U.S. Geological Survey and the National Climate Adaptation Science Center. And each center has USGS science staff. And so at the NE CASC, the USGS science staff have their own portfolios and are embedded into the University of Massachusetts as adjunct faculty. UMass is the consortium host, and the consortium includes the institutions on the right of the slide, the right side of the slide, and those are eligible for annual funding opportunities. Each of the consortium principal investigators lead their own long-term science portfolio, which allows them to be responsive to emerging priorities over time. The United South and Eastern Tribes is an intertribal organizational partner through, as Will said, the Bureau of Indian Affairs Tribal Resilience Program. And there's a tribal climate science liaison and assistant liaison. And we also partner with a principal investigator from the University of Maine, who's a visiting member of our leadership team. The role there is to help among other things, to help inform our tribal engagement strategy. Next slide. There we go. The mission of the Northeast CASC is to team scientific researchers with natural and cultural resource managers and local communities to help fish, wildlife, plants, waters, and lands adapt to changing conditions. And we aim to produce science that is engaged through partnerships with managers, communities of practice, co-production of science, science that's innovative and integrative, that addresses grand management relevant challenges, and science that's actionable and results in more than just research products, but also results in action. Next slide. So what does it mean to be a part of NE CASC science? We aim for it to be more than project data and results, though those are very important too, but also building relationships. So co-production of knowledge, connecting resource managers with researchers and communities, providing advice and decision support. So not only assessments of vulnerability and impacts and providing the best available science, but also addressing management questions and building capacity, working with users to create actionable solutions. And we aim to produce science that is transparent and open, and that helps to lead to evidence-based decision-making. Next slide. So where to start with building a project with the NE CASC? If we're thinking about it from a management perspective, it starts with a challenge. What's the challenge, and how can we articulate it? It's a real and applied policy challenge, or a decision to be made, a policy to be changed, or a need to understand more detail for successful planning. And so if you're coming from the management community, finding a partner would be the next step. So this would be an eligible principal investigator from one of our consortium institutions. And we can help make introductions also. We can help connect folks too. So don't hesitate to reach out if you're looking for some particular expertise. And then together, those researchers and managers craft the proposal, and there's coaching available from NE CASC on sort of CASC style science. And we want strong proposals, and so we're motivated to help make them strong. Next slide. So here's an example of CASC style science. This is the Northeast Regional Invasive Species and Climate Change Network, or the Northeast Risk Management Network. And the story behind this network is that Carrie Brown Lima from the New York Invasive Species Research Institute heard a challenge from managers who needed more information about incorporating climate change into their practice. And so she approached the NE CASC, specifically Tony Lynn Morelli and Bethany Bradley, and partnered with them to jointly hold initial listening sessions with managers and conduct a survey to assess priority needs. Excuse me. They wrote research proposals to address the greatest needs. And then the risk network was formed and is supported by the NE CASC as an ongoing effort. The risk the network aims to reduce the compounding effects of invasive species and climate change by synthesizing relevant science, sharing the needs and knowledge of managers, building stronger scientist-manager communities, and conducting priority research. And to date, the network has produced 13 research synthesis documents, over 200 summaries of research papers, and also 10 research papers that are directly stemming from manager needs. Next slide. And I think this is off to you, Will.
Yes. So one of the ways that we execute our mission or realize our mission, and the main vehicle through which we do that is what we call our annual project call. This is something that we do every year around the same time in the spring, where we send out a solicitation to our eligible partners and we ask them to help us develop new proposals or help us identify new research that can be undertaken. I'll talk about how to develop these proposals in a moment, but first to say that these proposals are expected to be responsive to the call. And in the call, which I'll talk about again in a few seconds, is these expressed management challenges that we're facing. And the PIs are asked to put together 2 to 3 year projects, roughly about $500,000, that are aimed at partnering with managers or resource managers to respond to those challenges and fit into our portfolio. The process starts about late spring. We look for statements of interest. These are short 2-page documents that we send out to a technical review. From that, we identify several that we want to invite to a full proposal. This is something on the order of 10 pages that we then do a technical review and make a funding decision. Typically, we try to do that in the late fall. I've put some asterisks there to point out that we're a federal program, so we're for better or worse tied to allocations from Congress. So we sometimes get delayed in our funding decision if Congress has failed to pass a budget in a timely manner. So there's a little bit of wiggle room towards the end of that timeline, but roughly every year in late spring, you can expect us to announce our science priorities that we're looking for responsiveness to. Even though this is our main vehicle through which we solicit projects, we are always available to chat. We're always looking for ideas from managers or researchers to come to us and talk through the challenges they're facing so that we can put together either statements of interest for the annual cycle or work off cycle to figure out how we might build a project in time for our funding cycle. So throughout this presentation, we've talked about the consortium, we've talked about the university federal partnership, and we've alluded to sort of eligibility. So this slide is meant to tell you a little bit more about that. The consortium, as you heard from Addie Rose, is made up from a number of university partners. You can see them identified here on the map. Any person at one of these institutions is eligible to apply for funding. So it doesn't have to be the principal investigator that we work with at University of Vermont. It can be any faculty of University of Vermont can submit a proposal as a principal investigator. So from the manager perspective, if you happen to know somebody at one of these institutions or would like to be introduced to one of the people at one of these institutions, we can make that happen and find ways for you to be eligible. I think this opens a wide net of places to enter into our network. In addition to the consortium, anyone from a USGS center, field station, laboratory, co-op unit, any of those can apply for funding. So that's another way, if you don't know somebody at one of these institutions, to get connected with USGS staff directly. We also, in order to be eligible for funding, are looking for work that happens inside of our Northeast footprint. That's the purple region identified here. That's a pretty important piece. We want to see research that's affecting our region and the resource managers in our region. However, while the PIs have to be affiliated with either USGS or a NE CASC consortium institution, co-PIs can come from all over the place. We have co-PIs at other academic institutions, at other federal offices, state offices, tribal offices. All of those can be accommodated through subawards from the main project. So there's a lot of ways that people can get involved in this work, and a lot of ways to be eligible for this funding. So how does funding work? We have three sort of principal vehicles that we use for funding. And to some extent, it depends on the PIs or the researchers involved in the project. The three vehicles are working with USGS staff. We can fund them directly. Working with other federal staff, we can go through what we call interagency agreements to send money across the federal bureaucracy. And then the vehicle we probably use most often is our consortium funding. That's money that when we decide to fund a project, we send that money through our host institution, University of Massachusetts, and subaward through to our principal investigators across the consortium network. While these are our main vehicles for funding, this slide is not meant to imply that each project, that it's a one-to-one match between project and funding vehicle. Occasionally, we'll have projects that work with people from all over. So it could be a consortium PI partnering with a USGS scientist, which might require 2 lines of funding, or it might be someone at USGS working with someone at Forest Service, which can require 2. So these are sort of the options we have to fund projects, and we mix and match them to get our mission achieved. I'll turn it over to Addie Rose now to talk a little bit about a couple more projects that we think have sort of highlight the success of our mission and our vehicle.
Great, thanks, Will. Yeah, I'll talk about 2 projects here. They show different types of science. They are both coastal projects, but we do work in other systems and with other ecosystems. So this one here is led by John Woodruff, who is one of our university co-directors here at UMass. And this project shows a multi-sector collaboration to interpret climate data for Greater Boston. NE CASC was one of many partners that supported this work. It was led at UMass Boston and by the Greater Boston Research Advisory Group. And the group included multiple stakeholders that were interested in climate impacts on ecosystems and lots of other systems as well. It included a key chapter on sea level rise and coastal flooding that was co-authored by NE CASC PIs and graduate fellows. And the work in this chapter is now the national gold standard for developing flood projections focused on a major metro region. The NE CASC supported Hannah Baranis and her PhD dissertation, in which she developed new techniques for including statistics related to tidal probabilities and storm tide seasonality, which were then applied in the sea level rise and flooding chapter. Next slide. The next project represents an evaluation of a climate adaptation strategy. And so in this case, the strategy is runneling. And runneling is a technique for creating shallow creeks or ditches that can help to restore tidal hydrology in drowning marshes. And it's an emerging tool for helping salt marshes adapt to sea level rise. This project is led by Linda Deegan from the Woodwell Climate Research Center, a consortium institution, and includes a variety of federal, county, NGO, and coalition partners. And the objective was to evaluate runneling to help resource managers determine how best to plan and implement this method. And it addressed a management need for testing and evaluating this approach. And for supporting that this approach could support critical habitats for vulnerable populations like the salt marsh sparrow. It also addressed a gap that no data was available to describe runnel construction or outcomes for wildlife, and that there were not many tools available to identify marshes and high priority habitat. And so this project expanded Runnel evaluation in marshes to include information on wildlife, identified marshes that meet criteria suitable for use of Runnels as an approach, and also piloted a tool to help identify priority habitat for wildlife using remotely sensed data. And Will, I'll turn it back to you.
Yes, thank you. So you've kind of got the general view of how we work, our partnerships with the consortium, our annual funding call, and now we're going to talk a little bit more in a general sense about what makes projects successful in the NE CASC. You've heard a couple great examples from Addie Rose. First, in kind of how to make a successful project, I'll talk about our key science priorities. These are the 4 big buckets that we use to organize our science and think about our science. I'll run through them quickly. First, we have climate impacts and vulnerability of our relevant systems. So that looks at how climate is actually impacting the landscape as well as the vulnerability of species. We then have a second bucket focused on effectiveness and transferability of adaptation actions. So this is saying, when we respond to climate change, how do we actually measure the effectiveness of those responses and the transferability of something that is developed in one place for another ecosystem? We also try to incorporate the social, cultural, and economic considerations. So this is looking beyond the physical and biological life sciences to look at how our culture is impacted by these management actions. And then finally, the last bin is focused on landscape scale conservation. This is an area that we've really led the field on, looking at large landscapes and understanding the heterogeneity of those landscapes and the climate adaptation strategies necessary across landscapes. So these are the big buckets that we use to organize our science, and we'll introduce these in our funding opportunity to say this is sort of the guardrails on which our science functions. We have other drivers of our portfolio that I'll talk about. You'll see over the next couple of years, as we introduce our funding opportunity, you'll see those 4 buckets that I just mentioned. And each year we'll identify a handful of target areas that we're really focusing on. These are areas that we've looked at our portfolio and found, oh, we have a little bit of a gap in here, or we have a management partner specifically asking about X, Y, or Z. So those are specifically highlighted in our annual project call. In addition to those priorities, we look to balance the type of work we do. We do vulnerability, transferability, social context landscapes, invasives, coastal systems, et cetera. And we're continually looking at our portfolio to make sure that the balance of these topics and strengths in our portfolio is reflective of the manager needs. In addition, we look at our portfolio and think about the partners that we're serving. You heard us talk about actionable science. You heard us talk about co-production. One way we evaluate that is looking at who are the partners that have, so to speak, signed on to the projects that we have in our portfolio. Do we have a good distribution of state and federal partners? Are we responding to tribal and indigenous communities appropriately? So looking at our portfolio and thinking of who are we actually serving? And then in addition to that, our footprint, though, has been reduced in the past couple of years, is still pretty large. And so we have to continually think about our geography of the region that we're serving. Are we serving the southern portion of the region just as well as we're serving the northern part of the region? Are we providing an equitable opportunity all the way up from Maine through down to Kentucky? And then finally, because of the times we live in and the social values that we hold as a center and a staff, we're also thinking about the social equity of our science, the social justice impacts of our funding that we put out onto the landscape. And so we think about how do these projects, these selections of PIs, these communities that we're supporting, the funding of students, how do they affect social equity in STEM? And so those are a handful of other drivers that really help us evaluate the proposals that come in for our annual call. We'll close here by talking a little bit more about some of the less tangible things that make our projects successful. I'll give you a little overview of my perspective of it, and then I'll invite Addie Rose to talk a little bit based on her almost a decade of experience working with projects in CASC and kind of giving you a flavor of what she's seen. So what makes a project successful? When we look at portfolios or proposals that are put into us, one of the first questions we ask is this something that fits our priorities and our strengths? Is this something that we have done in the past or have the capacity to do now? And I hope you've got a better feel for that given the previous slides. Another thing that we look at is active management partners. So you've, again, heard us say actionability, you've heard us say co-production, and we're really looking for that in our proposals. We're not looking to fund projects that pursue an interesting research question just for the advancement of knowledge. We're looking to fund projects that are actually responsive to those management partners. So while they may be innovative science, they are actually responding to clearly defined questions that have a context for action. We're looking for proposals that show us that a manager was actually involved in the development of this proposal from the get-go. It wasn't a research idea that was shopped around to managers, but rather a collaborative development. In addition to active management partners, we're looking for action. So we're looking for outputs from our projects that are not just publications in a scientific journal, but rather expand to actual decision-making challenges, looking for clear deliverables along the way, milestones along the way that say, this isn't a project where you dump $500,000 in and maybe you get something at the end, but we're seeing some growth over the couple of years, both in the relationship with those management partners and the decisions that are able to be made. And then finally, and I alluded to it earlier, we are looking for innovative science. We're not just looking to serve as a consultant to management partners. We're looking to provide the best available science and move the science forward for decision making. So at a high level view, those are the kind of things we look for in a less tangible sense in our proposals. Addie Rose, why don't you share a little bit of your insight?
Sure. Yeah. So NE CASC has been around since 2012. And we've funded a lot of different types of projects over that time with various goals and outcomes and partnerships. And I just want to touch on a few of the outcomes that we're especially proud of. One is projects that reflect our core values and are specifically relevant to key partners. So DOI agencies, states, tribal nations, that's sort of a fundamental requirement. And then another thing we've noticed is that long-term relationships that are built through partners like or projects like this are sometimes last for entire careers. And these relationships are so important because partners call on each other again and again because their connection is really strong and productive. And so they continue to go back to that because that's where that's where the answers and the solutions are coming. We're proud of community building efforts that have brought folks together around a shared goal and have leveraged each other's expertise and networks to scope an initiative that develops an innovative solution. We're proud of solutions that are scaled. Maybe they start with a particular location or community, but are then can be scaled to serve different geographies or different sectors of audience. And sometimes the most powerful outcomes stem from building on work that's already existing, not necessarily developing new science, but building on existing work to add value and scale it or translate it differently. And when it comes down to it, every partner that is added to our network through these projects adds new knowledge, new experience and networks that can help move us all closer to the urgent goal of effective climate adaptation. So I'll hand it back to you, Will, and you can close us out.
Yes, thank you, Addie Rose, and thank all of you for listening to us today. We hope this has been really informative for you. we're recording this in the hopes that it's a presentation that you can go back and share with others to increase our engagement with partners across the landscape. I think for now, we'll end our recording and take some questions. And I'll just close with a message that we really hope that you're able to reach out to us. We try to keep an open door so that we can make ourselves available to discuss any ideas that might be interesting or relevant to you. So please take this as an earnest invitation to give us a ring or drop us an email, and we look forward to talking to you.